everyone. Thanks so much for coming. It's so amazing to have an event in the shop. It's the first one for 2 years for me, so I'm really happy, and it's just an absolute pleasure to have Musa and Tayo here to talk about In the End It Was All About Love, which is published by Rough Trade Books, and it's been on our bestseller lists for months. So just some brief introductions. Musa Okwonga is a writer, broadcaster and musician. The co-host of the Stadio football podcast, he's published 1 collection of poetry and 3 books about football, the first of which, A Cultured Left Foot, was nominated for the 2008 William Hill Sports Book of the Year award. His work has appeared in various outlets, including Africa as a Country, Byline Times, Foreign Policy, Guardian, the New York Times, The Economist and The Ringer. One of them, an Eton College memoir, was published this spring by Unbound, and In the End It Was All About Love was longlisted for the Gordon Byrne Prize. His new middle grade book, Striking Out, written with Ian Wright, was published in September of this year, and he lives in Berlin. And the chair for tonight is Tayo Popoola. Tayo is an award-winning audio producer, presenter, DJ and podcaster. He makes documentaries for the BBC, from music to politics, and most recently, the narrative football podcast Giant for Spotify. He also co-hosts the Arsenal podcast, The Tuesday Club. We're going to start with a reading and then discussion, and then we'll go to audience Q&A at the end. And so we just ask, when you're formulating your questions, that they are actually questions rather than comments. And the event is being filmed, as you can see, for our YouTube series of literary events, which you can watch again anytime. So if you could just make sure your phones are switched off, the books will be on sale at the end, and there'll be a time for signing as well. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Musa and Tayo.
How to Eat Cake in Berlin. Dedicated to Kirsty. The best time to eat cake in Berlin is a weekday afternoon, say 2 p.m. on Thursday. You can't do it much earlier because you won't have earned it. You have to get the timing just right. If you get to the cafe for 3 p.m, then, when you finish, you will emerge into a swarm of angry and homeward-bound commuters. The best place to eat cake, well, that varies. It depends what you are looking for. If you want to go somewhere where you can pass out after the arrival of the sugar rush, then there's that quiet spot of your neighborhood, the one where the atmosphere is almost supernaturally gentle, where, even when it was full and busy one evening, you were still able to write a short story without being distracted. That's the same cafe which has a dog who seems to spend 95% of his time in a state of hibernation, slumped on a shelf just behind the bar, and who only wakes when another dog enters his realm. Then he's almost on his hind legs with fury and won't stop roaring until the door closes behind the startled and rapidly retreating invader. That's also the cafe where the toddler babbles at you in Spanish and tries to impress you by holding up a series of nearby objects, waiting until you nod in approval before presenting a new one. A salt shaker, a menu, a sugar bowl. You are always impressed. This place is as tranquil as your first girlfriend's bedroom at university, and when you fall asleep here, no one nudges you awake. If you want to eat cake in a place where you can dream, then you wander down the street to a cafe which also serves salty stew and cups of hot chocolate so thick you can almost stand up a spoon in them. This cafe is where you will spend many afternoon hours gazing out of the window and planning new adventures. This cafe is the place where you are sitting, where you heard from a dear friend for the last time, when he sent you a text message from his deathbed to remind you that, on that particular day, you were doing exactly what you were meant to be doing with your life, not worrying about making money or what everyone else was achieving in their careers, just being. If you want to remember him, you go and eat there. If you want to eat cake in a place that reminds you that love is possible, go to that cafe across town where they drown each slice of apple pie in whipped cream, that one whose back room is filled with 70s-style sofas and which is graced with a small cabaret stage. In this cafe, over cake, love twice came close. Or, to feel similar, catch a tram 15 minutes from your flat, where you spent a Sunday afternoon sharing sachertorte on a first date with someone who understood you. If you want cake for its own sake, which of course is reason enough. Then go 3 stops down the line for a serving of marzipan moan, its thick speckled layers of sponge dissolving the moment they touch your tongue. If you want cake which rewards your loyalty, then go to the cupcake store nearby, where every week you get a free helping because you are in there so often, and where you were just beginning to build up the courage to ask out the woman you'd seen working there for years, and then she left her job. To eat cake in Berlin properly, never reveal where you eat. If you must, then guard your preferred locations with the jealousy of an insecure lover. If you are feeling a little more generous, then leave hints as to where you've been eating, perhaps the odd photo on social media, so that the keenest detectives among your friends can figure it out. As ridiculous as it seems, not only to you, but eventually to your dentist, cake has become your sanctuary. It is your ritual. Each year, after you've completed your tax return, you catch the underground train to Mitte and mark the occasion with a dessert that costs no more than €4, a restrained way to celebrate yet another 12 months as a freelancer. Cake punctuates your artistic career. Each mouthful is a milestone. Whilst this town offers many escapes, many vices, yours is icing.
Cheers, Musa.
My man.
I got a little reading as well, but it's all about you, not about cake. So I just wanted to say, just to start off before introducing him, and this is the most scripted bit of it all. It's a real honour doing this today. I first came across Musa as someone who was on the spoken word scene, but like many, I suspect it was because of his robust social media presence, especially Twitter. More on that later, and that certainly brought me closer to him. And about Twitter, for something so impersonal, so performative, so curated, always felt like I knew Musa through his Twitter account, through his social media, which is extraordinary. It amazes me how you can manage to pack so much truth about yourself into 140 or now 280 characters. The way he talks about social justice, racism, football, politics, real emotions, books, culture, and lest we forget superheroes, because he loves his comics. Not a word wasted. And as I say, in such a sort of bizarre digital existence, to come across such warmth and honesty is a feat and a treat. I finally met him on a show I produced when he appeared as a guest, and guess what? He was the same in person. One of the things lost in the digital space, in the Twitterverse, is the laugh, and I hope we get some of that booming baritone later on this evening. So seriously, Musa, I wanted to... There it is.
Oh no, you drew me out.
It didn't take long. I always wanted to meet you personally. Before I did meet you, I wanted to meet you because I felt that we had similar backgrounds, similar upbringings, similar experiences of being black. I mentioned myself there not to share your glow, but because that kinship, I suspect, is what everyone here has felt. What's made this book a bestseller in this shop, and so acclaimed elsewhere, is the fact that the themes are universal to everyone, regardless of race, gender, class, or any of the other dividing lines that society's laid out. Themes of fear, loneliness, responsibility, friendship, family, therapy, heritage, sense of place, and as if we could forget, love. The search for love, I should say, towards you and from you to others, but also, and most importantly, a love for yourself and learning how to do it. So given the reading that we just heard, let's start with the Musa who moved to Berlin, found a survival guide, hid it behind a conversation about cake.
Yeah.
I read it as a survival guide to the city. Why did you move to Berlin in the first place?
Okay, I got to thank Carlos and Luciana. So I was going to Brazil. First of all, thanks for doing this, and thanks for the lovely intro. Congratulations on your amazing work, your amazing podcast, which is, I think, prize-winning, actually. The Mondial one.
I don't like to talk about it.
But it is what it is. I mean, the glow's right here. You might have some of the glow. Okay, so why I moved to Berlin. So I was on a flight to Brazil to do this documentary about the World Cup for BBC World Service. And normally on a long-haul flight, I basically just like plug in my headphones and just fall asleep on the runway and just wake up like 20 minutes before the landing. That's what I do. On this occasion, I had some of these, like, these bonbons that stop your ears from popping. So I offered them to like a couple next to me on the plane. I was like, do you want a couple of these? And they were like, oh, no, we're fine, thanks, but thank you. And we got on so well on that flight. We ended up talking from that small intro. We talked for like a few hours. We were such good friends by the end of the flight that we ended up interviewing them about Brazil and the cultural context, the racial, social, political context about Brazil for the documentary called The Burden of Beauty for BBC. And they also offered me to stay with them during the World Cup if I returned. So I booked my flight straight back to Brazil for the World Cup. This was March, so I booked it back for, I think, May World Cup. Stayed with them. And during a dinner in their house during the World Cup in Rio, we were discussing my sort of career. And they said, why are you still in the UK? Why are you still there? Your outlook is international. I was like, well, the UK is international. I said, no, it's not. They said, London's international. The UK is not. You shouldn't still be there. So I paused and I go, I was thinking about moving to Amsterdam or Stockholm. And they said, why not Berlin? So it came from them. I hadn't even thought of it. And suddenly I was like, hang on a minute. I did German for my A-level, right? So years ago I studied German for my A-level because I figured of the main Western European business languages, it was the hardest to learn. So if I learned that, I could just pick it up later. So it just sat there lying dormant for 20 years until one chance conversation in Brazil said, why don't you go to Berlin? And within 6 months of that, within 6 weeks of that conversation, I was living in Berlin. That's how it happened. Yeah, that's it.
But the guys that you're talking about said London's an international city, and you're from London, you lived in London.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm asking also, why did you feel that you had to move away from London in the first place, as much as to somewhere?
Right, so when you land, you come back to the UK, when you come back to the UK, it's like returning to a partner, like your heart lifts a bit, right? Like when you're returning to someone you love, you go through the door and you see them standing in the door where you're like, oh my God, like there they are again. I was landing in the UK and come back to the UK on the train from work at Eurostar, whatever, landing, and my heart wasn't lifting anymore. You know how you've been with someone for a long time, the relationship is actually over months before it ended. Like when you talk to your friend, they've been in a relationship for years or married, you're like, oh, I was with them for 13 years. Like, yeah, but when did it end? They're like, oh, right, you know what I'm saying? So in London, it ended before I realised it had ended. And it was one particular moment, I landed, and I just came in like over, because my mum lives quite near Heathrow. So I'm coming in like over the buildings, and I was like, it's not there. That thing isn't there. Like the kind of the lift in the spirit. And something was telling me to leave, basically, this kind of intangible. So I just kind of slinked off, and I didn't have a leaving party, leaving drinks, kind of went under the radar and just kind of was out. To the point where people were like, I'd moved to Berlin, didn't tweet about Berlin for the first year and a half I was there, didn't do a poetry gig in Berlin for the first 8 months. I was completely like subterranean, basically, as far as a tall, dark-skinned black man can be. But you know what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to ask you about
Get into that.
the ease of blending in, or how difficult it was. I mean, the city is a language that you have to learn.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult place to go to. You said that you didn't tweet about it for a while. You were just navigating your way. To leave a city which, like London is we talked about this earlier, London's a very difficult city to learn. We're very lucky that it came to us in the same way that people talk about English being a difficult language to learn.
When I come back
right?
to London, I'm like, how the hell did I speak it? How the hell did I speak
How
London?
did you speak London?
Yeah, it's wild. How did I speak it? Yeah, it's wild when I come back here.
So what's how different was that to speak in Berlin? And how did you learn Berlin?
So Berlin doesn't care if you get from A to B, right? Like as in like London, fundamentally the streets and whatever, the streets are fairly organised compared to Berlin. Berlin will have like, you'll be going to like a bar or a party, you'll get there late because the street numbers are wild. And it's almost like this city is trying to like, it's not consciously doing that, but there's so many like false starts in Berlin or false beginnings and so many surprising things. Like the city is much greener than you expect. It's much slower than you expect. You hear about this wild party city. And my friend came to Berlin, he was like, where is everyone? And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, oh, well, like, it's kind of empty, like it's not wild. And I said, okay, look, like, don't tempt fate. Like, don't tempt Berlin to go wild because it will go wild on you. And he's like, oh, now I get it. Like, I was like, okay, it got you, didn't it? So it's the change of pace in Berlin is the thing that really makes it mind-blowing. Like New York, the tempo is like always, whatever, like 140 BPM. Whereas like Berlin, it's like, it will go down to 82, then it'll bounce to like 180. Like, and that's the change of pace that makes it kind of special, I think.
When did you first come back after you went to Berlin, and what was that like? Because I'm just really interested in the comparison between a city that you knew but felt wasn't there for you anymore, and a place which you didn't have a clue about and that you had to learn with all the challenges that we'll come to very quickly.
I came back to Berlin within a week of leaving it for a stag. Like, so a friend basically organised a stag party, which was meant to be in Budapest. So I booked the train there. And on the train to Budapest, my friend was like, my visa's fallen through. Can you come to London instead? So I get to Budapest, having moved to Berlin less than a week ago, and I'm on a plane. I'm on the last plane from Budapest to Berlin. I'm like, if you told me this a week ago, I could have got the train 3 stops. So I came back to London 4 days after leaving Berlin. It was a big emotional thing. Coming back to London, but I already felt like, yeah, it was weird. Like coming back to London so soon, I already felt detached from it. Like my last week before moving to Berlin, I felt really, really anxious because I was nervous that the lease might fall through for whatever reason, and I was so psychologically prepared to leave. I didn't return after that until I think Christmas, and that's when I noticed it because, like, London is so much faster than Berlin. Like, living in London and crossing the road compared to Berlin feels like crossing the motorway. It's like, and in Berlin it's wild. Like no one crosses the road. When the lights are, like put it this way, in Berlin, if the street is empty and the lights are still red, no one crosses generally. So like even the kind of the German approach towards like space and respect for space and other people's space is totally different. London, everyone's just clambering over everyone. So that was a big difference.
I mean, both your books that I've read recently, this one and of course one of them, there's an element of you trying to, some might say hide, you might say blending in, you might say both. In one of them, like as essentially an alien at Eton, like one of 5?
Four
or 5.
12 and 50, yeah.
Yeah, I was 8 out of 800 at my place as well.
Goodness me.
But like, you know, blending in, trying to blend into a city, again we'll come on to race, but blending into a city that's predominantly white, it's got an oppressive past. I mean, if you're going to choose somewhere to try and slip in unnoticed.
But that's never been, I know, but it's never been an option, has it, for us? Like, we've never...
But it is an option in London, because in London, I think in London, or read Bristol, Liverpool, Birmingham, so on, the major cities, Leeds, whatever, where there is an immigrant expectation to go somewhere and to go somewhere where you are going to stick out, having been in an environment as a child where you stuck out.
But that's what I'm attuned to now. It's weird because, and it's a great question, but like, look, I'm a middle class black guy with an upper class education, right? So even in the kind of scenes I was in, a lot of people, like really close friends of mine now, for the first 2 years, they're like, the first years we knew you, we couldn't trust you because your political outlook was this, but your accent was this. So how do we know you were for real? So that was quite isolating, right? So I was very comfortable being an outsider. And to be honest, the UK didn't really have much use for me. Like frankly, like my career's, it's been great the last 7 years. I would not be sitting here now with this level of like visibility or success if I'd stayed in the UK. It wasn't being given to me because I was too, it sounds weird, it sounds strange to say this, but he's not street enough, he's not this. So, and I'm not blaming black people for this, I'm blaming commissioners. I'm blaming people who are like, oh, we don't have room. They didn't have, let me be brutally honest, they didn't have space for a black guy with progressive views who'd been to private school. They just didn't have room for it. It didn't exist for them. They didn't have a kind of stereotype for it, like, oh, what is he? Like, he's too posh, he's too... I'm not trying to like, I'm not like, it's not like a woe is me. That's why I quietly got the hell out. I didn't make a big song and dance. I just got out because I'm like, this country doesn't have, there's not a path forward for me. I've got to go away and make something new, if that makes sense.
I think this is something that we talked about when we first met, is this, and I was talking about things that made me relate to you, but this element, this conversation about duality.
Right.
And being black in a white world, being in terms of education and
right.
And so on. The idea of, as you say, commissioners not knowing what box to put you in. What are you? You know, you are English and you're Ugandan. You're a black man, but you're also, I say but, as if you can't be a black man and...
But they said to me, they literally said to me, we don't know what, I won't name names, but a commissioner from a particular organisation literally said, we don't know what to do with you. And I'm like, give me a gig. Like, what? We don't know what... I was like, well, what? Like, I said, what am I meant to do with that? Like, it's not about the work then, is it? It's not about the quality of work. Like, what is this really about? And it kept happening to the point where I was like, other people started remarking on it. Like, I wasn't an amazing guy. I think Steve just a guy like, from Twitter wrote a beautiful post, and he was like, what does this guy have to do to get any kind of respect? So I just left it. And it happened in a football context, right? As a football writer, I basically just bounced. I just got out of the country because I'm like, this is nonsense. How is it that I've written a book? My first book is about what makes football joyful and fun and anthropological. There's people here that listen to my football podcast, Stadio, like, how often do I actually talk about race as a percentage of times? Like a tiny amount, right? And like, all they were asking about race in football. They were not asking me about anything to do other than football. You listen to Stadio, I can talk about other things. And it's like if you're a fish that studied physics and everyone's always asking about water. You're like, I studied physics. Then you're like flapping your tail. Look, like I can do physics with my tail. They're like, no, we don't care. Like, talk about water. Like, and it was like that. So I just thought, this country is not going to like acknowledge me. Let me just get the hell out. And like they said to me, like, why did you go to Berlin? I was like, well, I just went there to kind of disappear. I went to basically live out. It didn't work out, but I went to live a quiet last 40 years. That sounds brutal, but I basically was like, I'm never going to get any respect here, so I'm just going to leave. That was it.
A quiet 40 years with a tweet every 20 seconds.
Oh, from a disclosed location. those are automated tweets.
Now, it's interesting about what you talk about the expectations of you. There's a radio station I won't mention who I remember talking to them and them saying to me that they were after something from, and I sort of started nodding at that, and then they came out with my favourite phrase, diverse voices, and it was at Christmas. So I remember drawing a Venn diagram of Christmas and then black issues and then music, and then coming up with a 3-part series on gospel. It got accepted immediately.
Oh, wow.
Because
that sounds great, though.
It was. But I don't like to talk about it. But but I mean, I mentioned that the expectations of you. So you needed to get out of the country to reduce those expectations and to create a different space for your art.
Yeah, my mum actually was like, what are you doing? You're going to Berlin, you've got no friends there, no networks, no contacts. I was like, that's exactly why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And she burst out laughing because I think she was like, now I understand you. I think until then, my mum had never fully got me, and I'm like, that's what I'm doing. I said, because what's happening is politically, in the sporting sense, it's like, Musa, talk about race. And like, I don't want to sound rude, but I'm like, I know more about football than you do. And you're like asking me about, like, what is this? Not to sound rude or name names, but like, I studied my football properly, and I was seeing people with like a lot of ignorance, like getting, it's not envy, but it's more like, what do I have to do to kind of, it's not about quality, because there's people who I regard as like not really doing a lot of the work, but they're getting places, and I'm not getting anywhere at all, and I'm really, really working. So yeah, like sort of went away as a kind of defense mechanism, really, to protect myself and not be the kind of the race guy, because I saw a brilliant activist, God rest his soul, Darkus Howe, was on TV, and he was so tired. And I'm like, I said to my mum, they're going to do that to me, Mum. They're going to have me on Question Time opposite some clown. And they did this. They actually asked me, like, a TV channel. In fact, my 2 biggest TV opportunities came the week that I moved to Berlin. It was at Question Time, Newsnight, and another one. And I said, no way, I've left. My mum was like, but it's news. I said, I'm not doing it. My mum was like, the Channel 4 Commission came in. I said, I'm not doing it. I've left. You don't understand. Like, and the Channel 4 Commission was a show that never got made. They wanted me to have a conversation with like a drunk racist, basically. And the idea is we'd sit around getting progressively drunk, and the drunk racist would get more racist, and I'd be then debate. I said, you know what that is? That's a minstrel show. I said, and I actually felt like saying, pardon my Spanish, like, what kind of dickhead do I look like that I'd accept a commission like that? You must really hate black people, or me. You either hate black people generally, or me specifically, to even send me that email. The fact you're not ashamed to contact me to go on a show with that clown. So I was like, fuck it, and I bounced. That was it.
And you bounced to Berlin, where, as your mum pointed out, you didn't know anyone, you didn't have very much thought gone into it, which you've just told us about earlier. And you learnt to, a phrase from the book is about treating loneliness as a friend.
Yes.
Tell us about that crushing loneliness of a big city and how it affected you and how it shaped you.
So one thing I'll say is I've got a lot of friends who are in relationships who are not necessarily as happy as they could be. And some might say from the outset, oh, they settled. But I'm actually not judging those people, because I understand actually like the bad choices that desperation loneliness can force you to. I'm extremely, I think, hard on myself, and I think over time, given my experiences and yours, that we've had to be survivors and very resilient. But I will never judge people for basically staving off loneliness by going for maybe less than they think they're worth in certain situations, because that world is brutal out there. And Berlin is an amazing city, but it can be very brutal. And the way that I managed to navigate that was be like, well, loneliness is the tax you pay for your escape. If you've escaped a traumatic situation or surroundings, then you're going to get lonely. It's just it's the price of your exit. Whether that's a family situation, a social one. I mean, like after writing one of them, for example, like a book about private school, that alienated a lot of people. There are a ton of people that read that were like, this is kind of like, they feel like I've betrayed the class system or whatever. And I'm like, there's parties you don't get invited to anymore. There's people that cut you off because of, like, you've spoken against the school or whatever. But it's like that loneliness basically is, at some stage though, you kind of invite it. Certainly what I write, I invite loneliness because I speak about things sometimes that are uncomfortable, but they've got to be said, right? So I take that almost as a kind of as a badge of honor, if that makes sense.
You take the
loneliness is a badge of honor, yeah, because it's to speak out about certain things is isolating, right? And to make a stand or to pursue a desire of yours, not to anyone's detriment, is a lonely act a lot of the time.
But I guess, one thing that I found uncomfortable, because I think one of the things that that lockdown for all of us has exacerbated is the sense of loneliness.
Yeah.
I found it uncomfortable how you talked about that loneliness. Uncomfortable because I kind of felt seen writing it.
Yes,
it's something that we've all been through in a way that maybe that we hadn't done before this,
Right.
in kind of social life. So how did you sit with that uncomfortable? You talked about like loneliness and in terms of standing up for things and being going in a different direction from the flow. But how did you deal with that intense loneliness as a person in a big city with a language that you needed to learn, not knowing anyone, and frankly looking like you do?
I kept telling myself, as far as possible, never make a decision out of desperation. Never ever do that. As far as possible. Understand that loneliness is it's like a weather pattern, right? It will pass. No matter how intense it feels, it passes. It's like a storm, it will last 45 minutes, it will last a couple of hours, it will pulse intensely. There's a matter of times, London's like, there's extreme showers. You go walking and you can tell who was outdoors between 4:20 and 4:25 because they caught all of the storm and you didn't. And loneliness is based on that pulsing shower. And so my whole thing was, this too shall pass. And the way that I met friends was thinking, well, actually, like, there's going to be a lot of people like you who are fellow travellers who've taken big risks to be where they are. So I went on Twitter, and basically, if I saw anyone in Berlin who looked vaguely interesting, online publishing company, performance poet, musician, I dropped them a line and said, do you want to grab a coffee sometime? And some of my closest friends have come from that, just from like a random coffee. In fact, I think those are all friends of mine now, people I wrote to on Twitter going, do you want to grab a coffee? In fact, one of them was the guy that I met who introduced me to my football team that I played for.
Which I was going to go to next, because you mentioned football a couple of times in the book. Sparingly, yeah. I'd say not enough, but you mentioned football enough in the rest of in the rest of your life, so that's fine. Football served a dual purpose for you in Berlin. Also, it serves a purpose for you in one of them as well, because it's something that you could excel at. So I
don't like to talk about it.
No, you just wrote quite a lot about how good you were at football.
No, not.
But talk to me about the importance of football in Berlin, like how it was also a safe space. We'll talk about some of the other spaces.
Sanctuary. So I played for this amazing team in Berlin called the Unicorns. Shout out to my captain, Andrew Webber.
Were they amazing before you joined them?
Oh, this team was scary good. So I joined them, and like most teams I played for, I'd been like, one of the better players in the squad. I joined there, and I was easily one of the worst. Like, there were 30 players in that squad, and I would say in terms of technique, I was like easily bottom three, steadily bottom three. Like, the quality was just unreal. And there were 30 of us from, I think, 14, 15 different nationalities with a German core, but like really international. And like, the back four was like, the defenders were like two of the best singer-songwriters anywhere in Europe. And the goal, and the one of our right back was a brilliant sports photographer, like one of the best in the world. and the goalkeeper's like a brilliant landscape artist. So like you had this incredible cultural team. One of the one of the midfielders was like, he's like a tech genius who built his own apps and like, studies economics at Cambridge. And it was this team was beautiful. It was this kind of real sanctuary of inclusivity, Berlin at its best, German speaking, but also like open to the world, which is like the EU at its best, really, at its very best. And the team had an express charter, anti-homophobia, anti-racism, anti-sexism. Like that was its kind of core, anti-fascist. And like, for example, like one of our defenders, who's now the captain, he hates when I praise him, Alex Todorovic won a human rights award for his work with immigrants and asylum seekers. Absolutely amazing. So you had this really strong moral force, but also the football team itself was brilliant. Like they got promoted in the first year I was there. They got promoted again recently. And they're just a joy to be around, to be with. And it's the conversations about sexuality, class, race in the dressing room. And it's normalizing a very healthy form of masculinity. We've got toxic masculinity, which you know about, but as a model of healthy masculinity, vulnerable masculinity, this team is just the exemplar of that.
Tell me again how you found that team and how
Twitter.
you found that space.
Twitter. I was on Twitter and I got in touch with Paul French, a copywriter and a wonderful online publisher, and we went for a couple of beers, watched some Champions League games, and eventually he was like, do you want to come and train with my team, play some football with them? I was like, I'd love to. So I turned up at this training ground, and Andrew, the captain, was like, is Musa any good? And Paul was like, I don't know, but he talks a good game.
He said he doesn't like to talk about it.
I talk a good game, I do. Anyone can do that.
Before we go on to the next stage, I'd like you've got another reading for us, haven't you?
I do, yeah.
Should we get into it?
Let's do it.
Tell us, first of all, tell us what it's going to be about first.
Okay, there's two segments to this reading while I leaf through and find it. The first one is about racism. Now, being a dark-skinned black man in Europe is more difficult than I would like it to be. It's challenging. Fundamentally, always stick out. And the problem, I think, is that as a dark-skinned black man, there aren't that many of us in Europe, so a lot is projected onto us. People living in small towns, met a black person, have so many preconceptions, it's hard for them to process us as we are. And that's a real problem. So that's the first reading I'm going to do. And the second part of the reading is about, we're so obsessed sometimes with achieving in our careers, which is natural, right? It's natural because we do unconventional things, so it makes us, how do I say it? I don't sound too negative here, but we can be curiosities. Until you achieve a certain level, you're a bit of a weirdo. Like among my friends, certainly, who are all lawyers in the corporate world, whatever, like, not among them, they love me, but in the wider circle, you're a bit of a weirdo until you start getting books published. And it's really interesting how there was like a 15-year gap between people not paying attention at all. All of a sudden my LinkedIn is buzzing because now I'm doing work with people they recognize. So the second reading is really about the lonely years of trying to get somewhere as an artist. And all those lonely years you're trying to achieve something, but you forget that the work you're doing that really is having an impact is the friends and family around you who are quietly paying attention to how you endure struggle with resilience and with dignity. So yeah, those are the two pieces I'm going to read. Part one. You wish your skin were a visa. You wish your skin were a visa, since there are several places it cannot travel. It cannot go to certain European towns, because when it does, it may be set upon by local youths, provoked by its confident passage down the middle of their streets. Your skin cannot visit certain boardrooms, certain hearts. What a time to have a dark-skinned migrant body. What a time to live within this terrifying vehicle, this dark bulk. What a time to be in this migrant body. When there are several of you in a particular train carriage in Hamburg, a cluster of dark-skinned black men of African heritage, you begin to think, are there too many of us to make them comfortable? There are 5 of you sitting in adjacent booths. 5. The other men are strangers, but they have just boarded the same train, and, in their dress, puffer jackets, oversized trousers and trainers, they are indistinguishable from you. Maybe if you dressed differently from these black men, the other white people in the carriage would feel safer, that you were not part of a pack. Maybe you would feel safer because you would not be seen as one of them. Look at the way you think about yourself now. African, dark-skinned, migrant. 15 years ago, you were simply British, part of an apparently thriving whole. But now, with each passing year, your identity is being divided up, with each element progressively more dangerous. Sometimes you forget you are in this migrant body, and then the news reminds you. You are heading back to Berlin from Hamburg, tired but elated after a day of recording new music, when you see some troubling footage being shared on social media. A black man is lying on the street in one of Berlin's busiest districts, and the police, instead of simply arresting him for whatever offence they have perceived, are striking him. You send a text to a friend asking if they will meet you for a drink when you get back to town, and when you see them that evening, you plead if you can spend the night at theirs, because you do not want to be alone in your flat just now, alone with thoughts of just how hated you are in this migrant body. Part 2. You were enough. Your younger cousin visits Berlin for the day, and she asks you to show her the city. So you meet her by surprise at the airport, and you take her on a train, not to Kreuzberg or Neukölln or Prenzlauer Berg or Mitte, but all the way through to the westernmost part of town, to the end of the line, beyond the reach of soaring concrete or phone reception. You disembark at the edge of a lake, and you sit there for a while, looking out over the town's border and across the water to the surrounding county of Brandenburg. I could stay here all day, says your cousin, in a state of wonder. You love surprising people who come to Berlin, who expect to hear the bass drum and end up entranced by birdsong. Some visitors cannot understand why you are at peace here, and you don't mind that, but you feel you need to explain it to the ones you love. Your cousin's company is a joy, and it reminds you how much you miss your family in Britain, especially since you don't have a relative living within 1,000 kilometres of you. When you go to London, you have dinner with several of them in their early to late 20s, with their cars and their first jobs and even their mortgages, and you are so proud about how they have turned out. You can't tell them that, of course. If you do, you will feel like their grandfather. They are just so kind and earnest and purposeful. One of them reminisces over how they first got into hip-hop. They put their ear to your bedroom door as you were playing a show you had taped from the radio, straining to hear which artists you were into, then quietly taking that information and building their tastes in music around it. You are astounded when you hear this. You never once heard their feet in the corridor. You spend a lot of time thinking about trying to leave your mark on the wider world, but you rarely think about the effect that you have had on those in your most intimate surroundings. Late one night, a relative calls you up to thank you for helping her through a difficult time. When your phone rings, you are at your desk in the corner of your flat, the street silent, your empty screen gleaming and unimpressed at your attempts to write. As she speaks, your conversation reaching far into the early hours of the next morning, you slowly begin to understand that maybe the most important work you will ever do is the work you didn't notice, the type you did while you were running off somewhere, obsessed with seeing your name on some imaginary bookshelf or festival billboard. It is the work of stopping and listening and caring, and you make a note not to get distracted from it too often in future. You say goodbye to your cousin, and as she heads home, you are suddenly and deeply moved by the thought that you barely did any sightseeing, that she got on the plane in the certainty that she would have a great time hanging out with you and just you. Maybe you should not be so surprised that Berlin, for all its beauty, is a sideshow, and that you were enough.
I'm going to take those readings in reverse because we need to talk about race a little bit, I think.
Let's do it.
I wrote down, first of all, remembering that you're black. This is something that's it's an issue it's something I always think about. But then what I really mean is rather remembering that it matters to others.
Right.
That you're black. And that's whether it's a white girlfriend, and the cab that doesn't stop for you.
Yes.
You know, whether it's being out with your mates on the way to a club and having the bouncer step across you.
Or at customs, you're looking a bit too confident. They give you the kind of the once.
You have me, walking through customs with your slightly bowed. I've done that. Take off the jewellery.
The customs, it's the customs walk. The customs walk.
A friend of mine, an old DJ partner of mine called Frank, used to go through and remind the promoters that I'll be through in a minute, because of all the times it will take me longer to go through the final search, the cavity search while he's waiting through there. Sorry, T will be through in a minute. you talked about in your reading just then. You mentioned about an issue in the news that made that reminded you of that. Oh, there are a couple of things we're allowed to do. We're allowed to run fast and jump high in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
You are allowed to be a DJ in Eastern Europe, or a sports person.
Yeah.
But don't stray too far from the promoter, because at night, because then you get reminded. But a brutal reminder that you talk about in the book was, of course, the two girls.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to talk about it again, because you've got it out there and it doesn't upset you, hopefully, too much anymore.
No, it's all good.
Just tell us, just describe what that was like, and I guess this remembering that this reminder of your blackness.
Yeah, so some things in the book, I mean, clearly didn't happen, like, you know, the therapy who's a spirit walker didn't happen, but some things did, and this is a thing that happened. I wanted to blend a lot of, like, fact and fiction, and this was 2 white women when I was walking back to my place, and one of them shoved her friend into me as a joke, right? And I almost, like, threw him with my feet. Minding my business, listening to music, headphones on, hood up, almost, like, fell to the floor, and luckily the railing made me stand up, and I turned around and I was like, whoa, like, what was this about, like? And I was like, do you have a problem with black people? And first of all, she said, do you speak German? I was like, in German. I was like, yeah, I do. She was good, because this is Germany, this is our country. And I'm like, wow. I was like, do you have a problem with black people? And she was like, what if I do? And I'm like, what, you're a racist? And she's like, so what if I'm a racist? We got all kinds of racists, Turkish racist, German. Yeah, I'm a racist. So what if I'm a racist? And I'm like, what? I start taking a picture to record her or whatever, and she grabs my phone and runs off towards the station. So, like, I basically pursue her to the station. I was like, give my phone back, get to the station. And there's, like, I'm agitated by now. This, like, elderly white German couple are going, what's all this about? And I said, like, she's stolen my phone. She's going to get on the train. And the elderly white guy is like, why were you recording her? And I'm like, because she was racist and I wanted to catch you. That's illegal here. And he was like, anyway, you can't address racism through these individual cases. And our long-suffering partner and his wife was like, I'm so sorry. We're not all like this here. Meaning probably my husband as well. And then, like, a black detective. I've only seen, like, one black detective in all my time in Germany.
I was well into that bit.
This guy just steps forward, like, chill from nowhere, like Marvin Gaye looking, collar up, lapel. Smooth as, my goodness, beautiful man steps forward. He's just like, hey, look, he just sorts it out. He's calm. He said, listen, brother, this thing is getting better. I grew up in the East. And I'm like, you need to be in a screenplay. Like, you need to be in a amazing man steps forward. He's like, yeah, like, I'm from Congo. I grew up in, like, East Germany. Like, I know how this goes down. But it's like, give this man's phone back, sorts it. They get on the train and they go. And it was harrowing because these women felt so empowered. They were so proud. And I knew what part of the town they come from. I was like, I know where they've come from. And I'm like, they came from a part of Berlin where it is absolutely mainstream to look at black people like that, like prey. And, like, I'm a tall dude, and these 2 women weren't that big. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, if you're starting on me, what are your uncles doing, right? Who are they hunting down? And that's where the kind of concept of, like, doing this book as, like, a magic realist, parts of it real, parts of it not came from. That's why each chapter, each part starts with a kind of magic realist poem, because I want people to have a sense of, like, the atmosphere in the city at certain points in relation to race is almost like a form of, like, gravity crushing the black spirit, which is not unique to Berlin, sadly.
Yeah, you talk about that. You talk about that black gravity. I must say as well that you got quite lucky with the 2 groups of the couple and having Black Columbo around the corner, which I'm well into.
Black Columbo, lucky because it was 2 p.m. That's why. That was the evening. It's a different story.
Well, as I say, you were lucky because passers-by, and we've all been. Well, I say we've all been. I'm sure you've been in the same situation where it gets turned into the black aggressor. Like, all you see is somebody waving their arms around and getting told that they're...
That's exactly what it was. It's exactly what it could have been. Yeah. And that's how they bait you, and she knew she was doing it. The scary thing was they knew exactly which racial triggers to pull. They knew. But now, the way I handle racism now is, like, vastly different. Now I deconstruct it. So before I'd respond to it, right? But now, for example, so at the same train station, it's so funny, I think it's the same train station 2 years later, I was at the train station and I was trying to pay for a train ticket. I'll tell the story very quickly because I think it's relevant to the progress I've made in growth. So I'm buying a train ticket and about to go and shoot a music video. I've got my bag, all my stuff in it. And this guy taps on the shoulder, turns around, it's a tourist, and he's saying, like, do you know I could buy some drugs? And I'm like, pardon my Spanish, I was like, what the fuck is it about me that makes me think, you may think that I've got drugs for you? And they can never say it. They can never say it's because you're black. They can never say it. And they were like, no reply. So I said, okay, him and his two friends, I said, why don't we stop random people in this train station and see if they've got drugs for you? So go and pick the most middle-class looking, mild-mannered dude, white dudes, and like, excuse me, have you got drugs for these people? And I escort them around the train station, asking. Now, of course, like the middle-class white people being asked are terrified and sprinting out on the train because it's blowing their minds. And then I stopped at the train station and said, I shouted, has anyone in this train station got drugs for these men? They're trying to buy drugs. And they sprinted out. And now, whenever I get asked for drugs in any club or anything by people, and they've stopped asking me, because my whole energy is different now.
Whoever started that round of applause, please carry on. That's amazing.
So.
I mean, my response in clubs always used to be, no, but there's another black person over there. If you go and ask them, they might be able to help. And I'd say increasingly angry. I get it, and it's a city that isn't yours, and you feel that you need to do that. But it makes me furious hearing you have to go through that to do that.
Oh no, but the funny thing is, the weird thing is, when I handled it differently, when I handled it with humour, it was fine at first, but I went home and I was in pain, because what I realised I'd done was I'd internalised it. And what I do now is I deconstruct it and I basically like hold up a mirror to them. And that's the thing. So like now it doesn't enter, because if I don't humour it, it never enters the system. So I'm like, let's go and ask random people. And even like in relation to other black people, I'm like, I don't want other black people to deal with this person. I want other black people to be protected from them. So the next time any of them approach a black person, when they're not saying drugs, black guys sell drugs on the corner, but that's because it's a corner. And because these people are like, they don't have documents, they can't get jobs, right? It's not because they're black, they're not inherent, it's not genetic. So my approach now is to make people think twice. I don't mind doing that because I know that for every interaction I have, it'll make the job easier for a dozen other black dudes who are just minding their business.
How did you manage to blend in to Berlin as a 6-foot black man? I mean, there's a concept. There's a concept of being, and I think this is one of the lots of a writer anyway, let alone a young black man as well. It's like just being alone in a crowd and trying to.
To be honest with you, look, we've never been invisible, right? And like we never had the option of invisibility, and people don't understand what that means. I'm not trying to sound like it's a sob story, but just it is what it is. So being at boarding school, it was funny. It was like, here's an example of like how you can't blend in. Everyone expects you to be a certain thing, right? So I used to play as a striker, and they would smack the ball ahead of you all the time because they expect a black guy to sprint after it all the time. Now, I had to become quicker to get the ball because it was the only way I'd get the ball at all, because no one was hitting me a short pass. So I became quick. Or I like dancing, for example, all black guys can dance. I had to teach myself to dance at the age of 13 because I'm like, one day, white people are going to be there, there'll be a dance floor, you'll have to be able to dance. So I learned to dance because I had to be able to do it. So I'm at university and we're training, playing football, and so the ball comes to me. And someone's like, oh, Musa likes the ball to his feet. He doesn't like sprinting after it. No one had noticed that in 15 years of playing football, I actually just liked having the ball at my feet because everyone assumed a black guy wanted to run after it. No one had ever actually asked. So what I mean about visibility, the point being that like, you don't get to be just Tayo or Musa. You get to be the black guy. Like you're never just yourself. And I know it sounds quite sad to say it, but when I went to Berlin, I was like, oh, it's just like Eton again. It's like prep school. It's like Sunnydale again. It's like a place where they observe you as a weird black dude, a lot of them, without saying it. Some will say it, and actually I appreciate the ones that say it because it saves your time. And your job in this crowd of like white people that don't know many black people is to find the ones that genuinely see your humanity and just focus on them. And people go, oh my God, Berlin's like this. I was like, well, actually, like, London wasn't easy. London wasn't easy at all. Like, dating in London wasn't easy because you were like a middle-class black guy without the currency, without the money. So you were like, what value do you have? So I think that being invisible in, how do I say this? The day-to-day existence of being in the Berlin middle class and the London one was not wildly different.
Can you just expand on that a bit more?
Well, like, how do I say it? People hadn't met many black people, right? They hadn't had black friends. Like some friends, they're very candid. They're like, I don't have many black friends. You're the first black friend I've had. And I'm like, how does this keep happening? Like, how few of us are being allowed through? Because like, I heard this off my parents. So how few black people are actually getting into like middle class spaces that they still don't know us, right? I'm not blaming my friends for this, but it's like one friend, for example, actually, she's an ex, we're like good mates now, but we dated for a bit. She said to me on a dating site, when I saw you, the first thing I thought was, what if he's a drug dealer? That was her first. She said, I can tell you this now because we dated and broken up or whatever. But she was like, yeah, when I first saw you, I thought, oh, what if he's a drug dealer? Then I was ashamed of myself. I was like, what the hell? And she goes, I'm from like a certain part of Spain, not many black people. You look like a nice guy. And I was like, let me swipe on him. And then there was a split second of like prejudice. And I was disgusted at myself. I said, I'm telling you this now years later because you talked about it and it's a thing I should be honest about. And like, this is the level of prejudice that exists even in supposedly, she said, to her credit, she said, even in supposedly good people, this is the prejudice which exists, which we're raised with. And this is one of the nicest people in the city. And we're thinking, if that person was almost put off by any kind of interaction with me, what's happening in the hearts of the ones who are like just wrong-uns, frankly?
That's why I'll always think it's wild that you left the relative comfort and anonymity of London.
But London wasn't giving me anything.
Yeah.
London wasn't giving me, this is the problem creatively, like, look, I said it in football, like, it's disgusting actually. Like, it's disgusting. I've got to say, I got marginalised in a way of like, talk about race, and it was disgusting. Like, people, I don't know name names, but I was asked to do a football podcast by a particular individual to record a podcast with them, and it was all questions about race, just after I said, I don't want to talk about this. And then I said, yeah, sorry, but it was literally like, I'm better at talking about football than most of the people you have on your show. You know what I mean? So, and this is what London was doing. London was putting me in a different kind of box, if that makes sense.
Well, I remember speaking to you about that.
Yeah.
We spoke after you'd just been asked about the event
Yeah.
that you're talking about. And that takes me back to the events, if we can call it that, of last summer when everyone had their little black squares on their Instagram.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we spoke around that time. You were writing one of them at that time.
I was, yeah.
What was that like, being a writer, writing about your experiences, your marginalised experience, your experience of, I mentioned duality and trying to fit in at a time when, I guess the long trauma of your childhood and those experiences were probably bubbling up to the surface again. I know they certainly were for me, and certainly a lot of the black friends that I have. Some of them with the same kind of bonkers public school experience that we've got, but also just in general. What was that like writing and remembering that at that time, and given that you were writing this in Berlin with the stuff that we've been talking about?
Actually, before we go any further, just a quick shout out to Nina and Kate at Rough Trade, because they put this book out there and they allowed me to speak as frankly as I did, because a lot of people didn't want this book. In the end, it was about love. And In the End, It Was About Love was actually really good training for writing one of them, because the style of writing was the same. Like, in terms of writing from the gut, I had the same routine when writing this book. I basically would wake up at like 6 a.m., 6:20, be at my desk with a black coffee and like a pint of water. Thanks for that, Joe. Reminiscent. Making nostalgic for it. And I'd write from like 6:30 till 9:30 and just write raw based on what I was thinking about the night before. So like every morning I'd write for 3 hours with full intensity. And the idea was to kind of convey all that trauma you're talking about with the utmost clarity. So I wanted everyone who eats the kind of, that really dark chocolate, the 70%, like, yeah, I wanted the book to be like, I wanted each paragraph to be like the literary equivalent of like dark chocolate. Like really, really like, you could gorge on it, but fundamentally, if you had a little bit, it would still feel quite rich. So when it came to writing about George Floyd and like Black Lives Matter, I'd been practicing this style of writing for so long that the process of like distilling trauma in a universal context was actually one that was I was very well suited to. Like, and shout out, social media gets a lot of criticism, but Instagram, the format of the slide format of like small bites of text, that was basically like, I've been writing that way with In the End the whole time. So actually writing about it, and I knew for a fact that because I've been using Twitter for so long, I knew that I was able to condense things into small spaces. And that's why I saw my unique value. Having said all of that, when I was finished writing about race that summer, I just went and just passed out. Because you're just scraping at your bone marrow, really. But I don't regret that because I know there was a value to it.
The second part of your reading, we could talk about race all night. The second reading, You Are Enough.
Yeah.
And we're finishing talking about your writing process. Simple one. I just want to know why you write, first of all, because you talk about. Let's go first of all. Why do you write?
I'm an idealist. I'm a real idealist. I believe that the tiniest interactions, the smallest interactions, can have an impact. I really believe that. I really believe that, like, you read a particular passage or poem and it can change the way you perceive things. It can give you respect for someone. Like, whenever I write about, ideologies I disagree with, I try not to demonize individuals. I try to express my hatred for an ideology. So my whole thing is like, I said to a friend last night, he said to me, Musa, like, the problem in our society is that everyone is basically like, why should I care about you if you don't care about me? And I said, no, I don't think that way. Like, if there was a flood tomorrow and there was an area with like far-right Nazi types living there, I'd still deliver food supplies. Of course I would. I said, look, just because they dehumanize me doesn't mean I dehumanize them. It's not how this works. We don't get out of this mess if we dehumanize each other. And the reason I write is to express that humanity as much as possible and to celebrate that humanity and celebrate, like, I don't know, gentleness, kindness, whatever you call it, or even not always kindness, sometimes like called moral fury, like trying to like fight for the dignity of people just to just live their lives uninterrupted, right? So that's why I think I do it fundamentally, and I do it across as many platforms as possible. Football, writing, poetry, a bit of music, not so much now, but a bit, but like just so people can kind of like find my work in all these different places with that common theme.
I guess the other reason why I was asking that is because, especially in this book, you talk about, because you mention it, especially being surrounded, I should say, first of all, in one of them, especially going to school with high achievers, people from wealth and so forth.
Yes.
You talk very much about feeling apart from that. When you talk about going back to Uganda and thinking, if I'd gone into the financial sector, then I could do this bit.
Definitely.
I could do this bit properly.
Yeah.
It comes up a lot. You talk about your bank balance or lack of balance in there.
Yeah.
You talk about writing semi-regretfully, but then also it's a compulsion. You've got to do it.
Yeah, because there has to be. I mean, look, I have got, I was out the other day with friends of mine, dear friends of mine from law school. They've all gone on. All of them have made millions, right? Now, I have a bit of guilt with that. Well, not anymore. I did until I think wrote the book, actually. Weird enough, the guilt's gone, strangely enough. But the guilt was there until the age of about 40, that I could have gone and done what my friends had done. It wouldn't have been easy, but it would have been possible. There was a path for it with my education, background, and job offers I had. I could have basically gone and made millions, and I could have helped out villages in Uganda with irrigation, with solar paneling, like all of that. I could have done that. I know I could have done that because I've got friends who have the means to do that. But I was like, actually, if you're looking at leverage and social change, there's some things that ideas can leverage that money cannot. And I could have ended up as just another rich person. And rich people, the funny thing that they have is they don't have the leverage they think they do, even a lot of the wealthiest ones, because they're still subject to the wider rules. And the only way to really subvert that stuff is to write this stuff. So I write because I feel I have to, yes, but also because, like, look, my family is from the north of Uganda, right? At one point in the 1990s, we had the highest child mortality rate in the world. So I'm basically someone who's like, I've gone to Eton, I've gone to Oxford, I've had all these experiences. I've got to make it count. And I might not make it count being a managing director at Lazard's or Rothschild's. That might not be enough, actually. It might not be enough. And so I'm very aware of like my responsibility to make work, because there are certain people that they never had the chance to make work. They never made it out.
I mean, you talk about this life unconventional, and it causes you as much pain, but as I say about this compulsion to do it, there's fear of consequences.
Yeah.
But you do it anyway.
You have to do it. You have to do it because this is how hard it is. You realize that at a certain point, like, it was never going to be easy. And the funny thing is, my friends would tell me that. My friends who've gone on and become lawyers and all the rest of their life. One friend said to me, he said, I'm jealous of you, Musa. I'm jealous of you in the best possible way. He said, because I wanted to be a writer when I was at law school, and every decision I've made was to make my life easier, to remove my dream because I was too scared to pursue it, and you never ducked from it in 20 years. This is one of my closest friends who said this, and he was like, so I'm buying you dinner on the condition that one thing, that you keep going with your dream, you keep pursuing. And I was out seeing the other night, they're like, we're so proud of you. We've known you for 20 years, we're so proud of it. You went and you did the hardest thing you could have done. You could have easily mailed it in, but you didn't. And these are people like peer group, 20 years. People can't believe, oh, you still got friends who are bankers. I'm like, yeah, they're my friends. Like, so I suppose their validation has made the journey worth it as well.
I think so much of your writing is about trying to hide, trying to blend in.
Yeah.
And yet you put yourself on the front line with your words out there. You also talk about, and there's writers here, of course, that you talk about how painful it is. I mean, we'll get to pressing send on a tweet in a minute, but like actually having work that goes out and being critiqued. And just talk about that sort of pain and fear. And
people don't believe that I'm shy about things. We had a joke. I used to call myself the shy poet as a joke, and everyone always laughed, right? And I'm actually I'm actually quite a shy dude, or quite retiring. Like, there's a lot of things, like, for example, I'm very public, right? But a lot of people are like, oh my God, you're so public. Okay, how many siblings have I got? And they're like, we don't know. I said, yeah, because you've never seen them on social media. You don't know anything about my personal life. I present you a very particular thing because I know that I'm very resilient and I can take a lot of heat. So I'll give you this public face, but actually the private self is completely private.
But I think I started off this saying that so much of people's tweets or social media is kind of curated.
Yeah.
But you've turned yourself inside out, not only in your writing, but also.
Yes and no, because this is the truth, and I shouldn't say it online, but I'm protecting those people that I love and care about.
But not yourself?
No, because I can take it. I can take it. Like, what I realized was, there was a certain point in my life, I was like, you know what, like, you're never going to be invisible. This work that I've written was a dream of being invisible, but it was naive. Like, it was never going to happen, right? People are going to see you. They have to see you. If you're going to be visible, you've got to be as visible as possible, right? But it means that then if you're drawing that much attention to yourself or that fire to yourself, the people you truly care about will be protected. So it's kind of like it's a form of defense by going on the attack, I guess. You
create work that people might hate or view with apathy. That's something direct from the book.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then you sit in your Berlin apartment in a ball, wondering what people think of it, and then allowing yourself to be open to death threats, which you've had, and to more kind of vitriolic criticism. And yet you still do it.
You have to do it because, I feel I have to do it. Because what are the consequences of not doing it? I come from an ethnic context, a racial context. The consequences of not speaking out, we know, are horrifying, both in Uganda and in the UK. And if life has shown me anything at this point, I'm tough enough to take it. Not everyone. It's not for everyone. I've seen it break people. I'm never going to stop talking my shit.
Well, let's talk about some of your shit, or at least some of your social media.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, talk about your relationship with that, because it has become a big part of you, and it's been part of your success. But it has exposed you, and what's that done to your mental health? What's it done to improve you as a writer, but kind of what's the opposite of not improve? That one. It's improved you as a writer, but it's also kind of made just things difficult day to day. And has it actually, in some ways, made it more difficult for you to write more honestly away from social media?
Oh no, it's improved my writing so much. I love short books. I wanted to write a book that was so short people wouldn't think twice about taking it on the underground or in their bag or their inside pocket. It's deliberately short, which is funny because a lot of publishers were like, it's too short. And I'm like, that's the point. Like, people are busy, they're on social media, they haven't got time. If you write a 70,000 word book, people are much less likely to take it on the train with them than a 30,000 word book. Like, that is like, take that anywhere. And Twitter helped me because you had to be so concise that the precision of expression you get from writing poetry and tweeting means that when you start writing, you're like, so for that it's been great. In terms of mental health, actually, it's really been fine. Like, after your first couple of death threats, you get a death threat. I mean, you get a couple of death threats, you're like, oh God, we want to kill you, okay. Okay, oh my God, we want to kill you. Okay, we get it. Change the record, buddy. And then also you start seeing, it bleeds into your like personal life and like out in the streets. So the first thing we see, like someone wearing like, because the Nazis in Germany, they're really well organized, right? Like there's a resistant, they got a solid 10% voter base, which is a lot of racists. That 10% Nazi vote, people don't talk about it enough. 10% Nazi vote in Germany. You see a lot of Nazis out there wearing the kind of like clothing brands, they look like designer, whatever, this and that. And the first time you see the Nazis out, you're like, it's like getting a death threat on Twitter. You're like, oh my God, Nazis. And then you're like, until you do something, it's fancy dress. Until you do something, it's cosplay, right? and so with that, like, the abuse on social media, like the orchestrated hatred, they used to come for me all the time. But the funny thing that happens is now, you start muting them, and years later, they start refollowing you. They're like, oh, that guy's actually like, he's got stuff to say. I attacked him. Sometimes you meet them in public, they're like, oh, my friend was a bit OTT. I'm like, yeah, I was performing. Yeah, because it's fun to dump on, like, let's be honest. It's fun to dump on a posh, black, bisexual dude on Twitter. It's fun. And it was a lot of fun before I was getting anywhere. And now it's like, oh, actually, like, he has something to say. So to be honest, I kind of just outlasted a lot of it, if that makes sense. Just outlasted it.
When you were struggling in your apartment by yourself, when you were trying to make loneliness your friend, did you always write? Was that the one constant? Do you always write?
Always.
Even when...
Always. Especially.
So friends get left once the dust, as you mentioned, the dust on the tidying up stops, but the writing continues.
Always, like, because, look, it's like if you're an athlete, right, there's days you don't want to train. Those are the days you have to train twice as hard. Those are the days you sharpen it. Those are the days you look right into it and you're like, okay, this is the only way forward is through it. You just keep writing through it. And the amount that you produce, my goodness, like, I never really had a kind of sustained writer's block, to be honest. Not because I'm particularly smart, because I can tell you, I know geniuses. Those geniuses have been touring the world twice before I had a book out. Those are geniuses. What I am, I'm resilient and persistent, and I always knew the way forward was through, I guess.
You chose a job. I'm going to move on to your family, and then I'm going to open it out to the crowd. You're a writer. I've got African parents, and when I went to university to do English, you know how that conversation went.
Badly, briefly.
Yeah, really badly. It didn't involve the words doctor or lawyer.
Yeah.
And
or engineer.
Or engineer.
Oh my God.
That was never happening.
No.
So that was really never happening. No.
Right.
And once I realised I wasn't going to be Tony Daly, I don't know if there's any football fans here, but erratic winger, used to play for Aston
I played with
Villa.
his brother, you know.
Did you?
Utan in Oxford.
We need to have this conversation ourselves. We're in the wrong place for that. No, we're in the wrong place for that.
Yeah.
What did your family? Let's start with your mother. Obviously, what did your mother and your family think of of the writer? Oh, you're a writer.
I went to ground for a few years. I tell you that. I went to ground. So I was a lawyer, qualified as a lawyer, and then left my job as a lawyer to write. And I was just like, I'm doing that. So I did it. And then just quietly went away. And the next time I saw everyone was 2 years later at my book launch for Culture Left Foot. And I was like, invited the entire family. I've got a book out. And they were like, oh. And they all turned up. And they were like, this guy's actually doing it. And most recently, my mum, for example, like, she was so proud. So I got sent a picture by a listener of our podcast, Stadio. And it was a bookshelf in Oxford, in Blackwell's, the university bookshop. And it basically, like, the entire shelf was like one of them. They had like 50 copies of it. And I said to my mum, I said, look, Mum, it's getting out there. And she was so proud. She went to surgery the next day and she was like, oh my God, look what my son's done. Like, and like, everyone's really happy. And it's like they've finally seen the yield. And all they ever wanted to see, really, I mean, parents are proud, but they also wanted to be sure that I'd found my way, right? And like, if you're a doctor, engineer, or a lawyer, especially as like an African parent or an ethnic parent, like, those are things you're guaranteed your kid's going to be fine. But writing is a total free-for-all. There's a lot of like white kids that aren't fine. Like, there's a lot of people that, it's brutal, right? So I feel like it is one of the hardest careers you can do of any ethnic group, let alone, with race and sexuality and all the rest. Oh my God, what's he done now? Like, but eventually it worked out.
And when you went back to your father's village, did you go back as his son, or did you go back as Musa Okwonga, the writer from...
You never go back as Musa Okwonga. You always go back as a son. You could be 80 years old and you're still a child. Let's be real about that. Come on. You never go back as... You're always in the shadow of the ancestors. Always.
I found that the most difficult part of your book, as someone who's also lost a parent, and has come from a culture over here, grown up here. Always say I'm more Lambeth than Lagos.
Real talk.
To go and be in your father's footsteps. When I went back and made a program in Nigeria and met all my relatives who I hadn't seen for 25, 27 years. I really got a sense of that from your experience there. If you could just tell us a little bit, read about it, but I'd just love to hear it from you, about
That experience.
that experience, but who you were after it, or how life
Single
eased
most
after
powerful spiritual experience of my entire life. Without, like, by a distance. So my dad died when I was 4 years old. He was killed in the war in Uganda, right? My first memory of my dad, my first 2 memories were his coffin in our living room in Uganda, and then me putting the first bit of dirt on his grave. Like, those are my memory of my dad is he was dead. So I hadn't seen him for 36 years, and we buried him under this like small tree. And I'd been gone for so long from Uganda, from that village, which I hadn't been to 36 years, that when I got back there, the tree was the biggest tree in the entire clearing. Like, it was huge by then. So like that, just watching that tree was basically, that was me. That tree was like kind of my age, right? So going back there was unbelievable, because he was like one of the first black surgeons in the UK, black consultant surgeons, got killed in this war and was regarded with this, reverence, was one of the top students they'd ever seen in the north of Uganda, like flew through his classes. But then my dad was basically born with that brain or that gift, and others weren't. And like, you think about it, like, the people in that village were there because their dads weren't born with that particular gift, and mine was. So but for that brain, I would have been in the north of Uganda. I'd still be there. I'd be like one of my dad's brothers, his son turned up, and we walked together, and I was like, my God, I could have been you could have been me. It's just a complete accident of birth. It's very humbling. But going to my father's grave and seeing it, so I felt for a long time that I wasn't worthy of what he did. He did all these incredible things. And I was like, hang on a minute, like, as someone said, you had a lot of guts coming back here. A lot of people don't even make this journey. And it was funny, like, even talking to locals there, because they'd heard something about my work, like my journalism. Because a lot of them are like old dudes, like work in media, like radio, whatever. And one of them said, this is like a weird compliment, but it's a really big compliment where I come from. They said, like, we've been reading about your work, we've seen what you've done with your books and your journalism, because I'm there, like, tearing myself to, typical me, like, tearing myself to pieces and go, oh, I'm rubbish, and like my mate's going like, you're really good at what you do, what are you talking about? Of course you're not being paid loads of money, because the people you're criticizing are the structures that they're not going to reward you with money, but that's a sign of your impact, right? And one of my dad's friends said, the son of this is going to sound ridiculous, you're going to laugh, but he said, the son of an elephant remains an elephant, he said. And he was like, you are everything that he would have wanted. And so I go to his grave, and the moment I leave, this like, I cannot, and I'm not a religious man, right? But this enormous spiritual weight disappeared. The shame all disappeared. I started writing one of them 2 months after I started writing In the End. I wrote Striking Out, and basically, like, along with it, like, in like 2.5 months, my creative output just exploded the moment I left that grave. Like, I wrote the entire last part of this book. I wrote on, there's a 5-hour journey I talk about from Kampala to the north. I wrote the entire thing on my phone, on my smartphone. The moment I left the grave, I started typing, and we got south, and 5 hours later, the entire thing was there, virtually untouched, right? That's how it came out. And that was the beginning of the rest of my life.
The creative release of the journey home.
It's exactly what it was. It was very much a journey, yeah.
I'm going to read something that someone sent me, which talks about that release. If you're Musa's friend, then he'll always be your best hype man. I just think the main change I've seen from a personal level to a professional level is this calm and this peace within what he is and how he wants to be, what his values are and what work he wants to deliver. And when I first met him, this wasn't so clear. He's always obviously been supremely talented, and I think criminally overlooked for a number of years. I'm not going to read that. Actually, I will read that bit, then you'll know who it's from.
I know who it's from.
You do, don't you?
I know it's from. It's him. I know who it's
Which is one of the main reasons why we started Stadio. Because I just felt that he really deserved to find control his own way, talking about football in his own way, and in a sense including all of the other elements that he wanted to include in it, whether it be pop culture or whether it's politics. So if you don't know, this is Musa's partner on the to-be award-winning Stadio podcast. And I spoke to him earlier on because I just wanted to get a sense of Musa beforehand.
He's a great man.
He's a great man. You met him in Berlin, and the thing that I took away from it, which is why I wanted to finish on it, it was just this sense of calm and release, which you've talked about, and this kind of creative fountain that has erupted since your trip.
Since the trip back.
Since your trip home. Do you still, let me ask you then, do you still have imposter syndrome?
No, I don't. Because that came from other people, and the metrics I was being judged by were, frankly, ridiculous. And the things that imposter syndrome doesn't come from within. It's like imposter syndrome is like taking a spacewalk without a suit on, and this vacuum is attacking. You can't see the forces attacking. It's like a vacuum. That's imposter syndrome. It's basically like a space that doesn't want you there, trying everything it can to kill you. And the moment you realize that, you find a way to put on a spacesuit, and you're fine. And I found a way. I found a shield for it, and now I'm good. I don't have that anymore.
Turns out you were enough after all.
You got me. Thank you, man. A pleasure.
Thank you. First of all, thank you to Pages for having us here and for allowing me the chance to speak to Musa, and allowing you now the chance to speak to Musa and ask him any questions that you might have. Who wants to start us off?
Please don't be shy.
When you talk about, for example, in your, I think everyone can probably hear me, in your Eton memoir, One of Them, and you were talking about nowadays still having sort of close friends who are bankers and sort of £1 million lawyers, and people are a bit surprised by that. Were people also, from your sort of more left-wing political circles, were they coming to that book waiting for Eton to get this thorough 100% bashing, and were they slightly disappointed that you could also see the good in it? I suppose the point I'm making is, do you sometimes find the more right-on world quite binary, like 4 legs good, 2 legs bad?
No, I don't mind that at all. I don't mind it because I understand why Etonians are hated. I understand why we're hated because, look, if a steamroller crushes you, you don't go, oh, the driver didn't mean it. You're like, the steamroller crushed my foot. So people have to have their rage. People would hate me for being Etonian to start with, and I got it, actually. I understood it. I'm like, look, I get it. Like, I've been driving a steamroller, or I've been part of a class system that's been steamrolling for ages. I can't expect you to like me. So let me hold that, and let me hold the fact that, like, these environments I would have been in, there's a reason these schools like Eton attract loyalty. It's because they fundamentally treat a lot of people quite well, and people come well out of them. So you can have people that go to these schools, get bullied while they're there, or they get marginalised, but they end up wealthy, and they're like, oh my God, I'll send my kids there too, because they understand that ultimately the school's given them access to a world they wouldn't otherwise have. Now, I don't mind people being, I think you're wrong and I'll never like you. It's like, you know what, I'll take that. I don't like it, but I accept it and understand it. And weirdly enough, the funny thing actually, Sophie, is I think that people at school would have preferred it if I'd gone and just like taken a blowtorch to it, a thermonuclear strike. What they didn't like was that I humanized the place and still provided critiques that were fundamentally like, they would, yeah, it makes it real and it makes it impossible because they would have loved it. They could have been like, oh my goodness, look at him, he's been cast out from the, oh no, he actually likes us, but I basically like, the tone of the book is that of a disappointed ex. And as we all know, the disappointed ex is far harder to ignore. Because the disappointed ex is like, you could have been good, but this could have been us, but you playing. And the book, the tone of the book actually is written in a very English register. And I will not name names, but certain individuals reached out to me from the institution and were like, they would have rather I had just taken the blowtorch because they could have dismissed it. Yeah. Because I didn't, more people are reading it, and more people are reading the critiques and going, hang on a minute, why is this guy who went there, who had such a great experience in so many ways, is now unsure about it, or is now critical of it? Why is it he said this and this and this? Why has he highlighted the fact that all the visible, prominent politicians are of one type? And not that they're conservative. I'm not against people who are conservative for the sake of it. Don't get me wrong. It's the lack of empathy. And in some cases, the active cruelty. And I'm saying, listen, by your own standards, if you're going to have all these prime ministers and you're going to have statues to them, you're going to celebrate them with statues, what is the quality of leader you're producing? If you're invested in producing leaders and the only thing they're characterized by, this group of leaders, is frankly their cruelty or their lack of empathy or both, what is that saying about what you're producing? That's a question for you. And because I framed it in that gentle way and that insistent way, it is more insistent. It is more powerful, I think, than if I'd just gone, because they would just, oh, he's a sport child, he's a brat. But they can't say that with me. And that was a deliberate choice of approach.
That's definitely where I went wrong. I went for the scorched earth approach whenever I think about that place. But just like on that, when did you get, or were you always comfortable being a black Etonian, or an Etonian who with, like, for example, I should explain, for like, whenever it gets mentioned, I've got friends here, whenever it gets mentioned or that I went to a public school, the words are barely out of their mouth before I've expressed the fact that a scholarship to go there from a poor family. Like, all the words come out immediately to try and qualify the school that I went to and who I am as a result of it. I'm not one of them. I'm not one of them. It comes out. When do you do that still?
No, it's like saying,
and were you always comfortable with it?
It's like saying I'm gay, but I'm straight acting. It's like saying I'm gay. It betrays a level of shame. It's not. You're a smart dude. You went there. You shouldn't. That's not on you or anything. Like, and this is not a judgment on you. It's like, if you qualify it, then at some level you're not at rest with it. Oh, you're black. You went to Eton. Yeah, I did. You did. Yeah, I did. Oh, you're this and that. Well, fine. Like, actually, I'm secure enough of myself for people to project things, and I'll just mind my business and get on with it, and they'll come around. If they don't come around, that's cool too. But I don't do special pleading. I don't do, oh, I'm not one of the.
But when did you get, it's easier now.
I was always like that.
But as an early teen?
In my teen, yeah, I never hid my accent. Like, this was the thing. Like, they used to be like, there was a fight that nearly broke out at the local basketball court, right? So I used to turn up at the local basketball court with my newspaper and, like, you know, I'd read it before I know, right? I would turn up with my basketball and my newspaper, and I'd read it, and one day one of them came in and they were like, oh, they're going to think you're educated if you do that. And I was like, I am fucking educated. And they were like, oh. And I was like, yeah, like, I just read this, and it's like, it's fun, and it's like, and they're like, oh. And then, like, a couple of weeks later, it was the same summer, there was a massive argument between these two dudes. They were about to kick off, and like, and these are big dudes, right? Because, you know, my local town, West Drayton, you had to, like, have a way to handle yourself, and it was never going to be power with me, so it was either just chat. And these guys were going to hammer each other, and they were like talking about, like, they were being like, and these two black guys were going to fight each other, and I basically was like, oh, no, this is like, your skin tones are this way because of X, Y, Z, and your families are from here, but there's a whole racial context of colonialism. So I just broke it all down, and they were like, that's the first time that, like, we've heard someone stop an argument and not with fists. Like, they said we've never been in a situation where we've never seen a situation where it's escalated and someone talked us out of it. It's always gone physical. And I was like, nah, but it's like, it's not your fault. You didn't know that. And then it broke it down. And after that, like, the respect I had, and it's just, I stood in one place and was like, I'm not going to, like, compromise. I'm not bigging myself. I'm just saying that, like, my refusal to hide was the key to my acceptance of myself and in that circle. And they never gave me hassle over speaking the way I spoke. Never, ever. So, yeah.
Do you get more pushback from, or did you get more pushback from the black community?
No, not really. The backlash came, let's be honest, the most backlash came from, like, middle-class white people who didn't know where to put me. Oh, he's not street enough. I did this, like, poem for, like, a magazine, it's unnamed, and they were like, oh, we can't do a profile on him. They saw my stuff, like, I won in 2007, won the Poetry Slam Championship, like, all this stuff was going really well, books coming out, nominations, whatever, and they came to do a profile, and they're like, oh, he's not street enough. They wouldn't do a profile, like a big magazine. Nah, we can't. Like, people were nicking ideas for mine for, like, you know, poems, whatever. I was seeing them turn up in, like, ad campaigns, whatever. And they would never work with me because I sounded this way. And this wasn't black people doing this. Black people always celebrate. You turn up at schools, oh, we're so proud of you. They were always celebrating. It was middle-class white people. And they didn't know what to do with me because I wasn't, goodness me, if I was a Tory, I'd have 2 columns by now. But, oh, great, because come on, he would be. Oh, he's a queer man bashing, like, you know, queer people. He's made it. What's wrong with you? Like, they were perfect for them, but they couldn't use it. They couldn't co-opt me, and so I just kind of had no value, really. That was never from black people. It came, never, ever.
Any other questions? Yes.
I had a question about the tense you wrote in.
Yes.
And
the craft. Entirely my wheelhouse.
What was the story behind that choice? Is it so that you were referencing yourself?
I wanted people to experience this book as if they picked up the book in an airport, arriving in Berlin, and used it as a kind of, like they were living it, like one of those, like
Fighting fantasy game.
Exactly. Like a first-person computer game. Like, so you're in it. That was a deliberate choice of tense. And someone said, "Oh, we haven't seen that tense choice for ages." And I was like, "Well, people use it now and again, but it's a risk because you're asking people to go from a universal experience to a specific one." So I deliberately started the book with like, you do this, you do that, and they're all very generic things that you could do if you're any kind of person arriving in Berlin. And then the experiences get more and more specific. So the point where it changes from general to specific is the heartbreak, because everyone relates to heartbreak. So then you have that universal, then you're like, okay, now let's get specific. So that was a deliberate, like, and you sort of, it's almost like when you're preparing a meal, the first thing you do is like set up like all the ingredients, right? And so I think with this book, it was like, what is the ingredient? Tense, what's the voice? Then I went from there. So yeah.
I like the way you said role play, first person computer game, and I went fighting fantasy game.
You knew, yeah.
Like it's still 1980. You knew what I meant, didn't you? Yeah. But on the tense, I mean, there's a book recently which, You Are the Ref. Do you know the book about?
I've heard it. I've not read it.
Uri Rennie is very much that you. There's a couple of people I was talking to here about just talking about the tense and talking about how biographical the book is. I was surprised that it was being discussed to me as if it was about anyone else but you. Who's right?
A lot of it happened. A lot of it didn't. And the bits that happened really happened, and the bits that didn't really didn't happen. So, for example, like I say, the therapist who's a spirit walker didn't. But I wanted that because Berlin was described when I moved there as a magical village. So the opening, actually, the one person I did not thank in the book that I wish I had thanked in the acknowledgements, and I probably should thank in a reprint, Maria Bickler, an amazing Austrian installation artist, incredible, got in touch with me, and she said, "I'd love to do an exhibition with you," because she makes exhibitions out of found objects. And she got in touch from Austria, from Graz. She's such a wonderful human being. And I met her, and she was so humble. She'd gone around Berlin, and she'd found all these different things in flea markets, all these different like objects, and she put together this incredibly moving like exhibition out of like random bits of throwaway like bric-a-brac lying in your house. And I wrote that poem, the opening poem, Righteous Migrants, based on her exhibition. Her work was so beautiful, it inspired that poem. And it was the first time seeing Maria's work that I felt I could actually talk about the magical realism, the magical sense of Berlin. So I wanted to start the book in a place of like almost fiction and abstract, dip into the real stuff, and then keep going, like call and response, basically. So yeah. So it's like a lot of things happened, but a lot of things didn't, if that makes sense. Yeah. Actually, so very quick, so for example, the poem Black Gravity, every single injury suffered in Black Gravity is something that one of my friends suffered. So every single physical injury in Black Gravity referred to is something my friend suffered as a result of a racist attack in Germany. Yeah. Easter eggs.
We got another question there.
Ooh, Joe. Joe, listen. Joe and Eleanor at Pages of Hackney, one of the biggest highlights of my year has been seeing this book like really take off in this shop. It's why I'm here. Like, I was so overjoyed, like when the little sort of like the blackboard, like, oh, like it's selling well. Because you're like, my God, this book it's in such proud company, it's reaching people. And you don't, I mean, it's weird because I lived on Mare Street for like 3.5 years. I lived down the road from here. This is the first time I've been here. I think the second time I've been here actually sober. The first 2 times I was here sober in this part of Hackney were the last 2 times I've been here, because I used to wake up here drunk on the 38, like after missing my stop. And that's how close I was to this area. I love this area. And to be back here is just like, it's a bit of a dream actually, to be honest. So thank you. Sorry to embarrass you.
And that kind of ties into my question, which is a lot of the, the way you write, it's so vulnerable, and like you said, the reason you write is, to kind of, is for these ideas and kindness and vulnerability. And so what I've experienced selling this book is the response from people is incredible, and people are very emotional about it. Oh, wow. And I just wondered if you'd experienced that too on social media, or like how do you get feedback on like the vulnerability that you put out into the world?
I've never received a response to a piece of work like this. I've never seen anything like it, because I would always write, like, I still write fiction and poetry, whatever, and other things, but this was the first time I thought, let me write about how this feels. How does it feel to have made the biggest gamble of your life and it not have worked? Because I kept betting the house on my talent, time and again, kept betting the house. Had a job offer at like a bank Goldman Sachs, turn it down, had the offer right there. And they called me up and they were like, oh, like, do you want to come in? I was like, well, actually, I said no, because if I take this job, I can't take this walk in this park for the next 10 years of my life. If I stay in Goldman Sachs or a bank for 20 years, when I finally come out and start talking about the world, everyone's going to be like, you're in a bank for 20 years. I love my friends. I love my friends who've gone and made their money, don't get me wrong. Having said that, if they came out now and started talking about society and whatever, everyone would be like, you're in a bank for 20 years, right? And so I think that vulnerability, that people's response, and I've said this before, confession inspires confession. So you share something, people share something in return. So the messages you get on like Instagram DMs are unbelievable. They're unbelievable. People telling us about their lives, like, I went through this, I went through that, this book allowed me to do this. The best message I got, someone said, I hadn't been to my mother's grave in 13 years. And I know his wife said, your book calmed him, and he went to his mother's grave for the first time in 30 years. He'd never been back there, and he read your book and he did it on the basis of that. And then she said, this is the thing that really got me. And I was like, well, I was already like a bit taken back. She goes, I'm terrified of flying, she said. I'm terrified of flying, and now I'm not scared, because when I take off on a plane, I start reading a book and it calms me. Like, who would have even, that's a thing you can't, but I think it's because the book is like so vulnerable and people walk around, and actually, you would have thought the vulnerability actually makes people kind of attack you more. Like, he's spoken like this, but it actually terrifies them. Even people that are like, that attack you, that hate you, they're terrified of you, because they're like, this man told us everything, like, about the human condition, and he's walking among us. His race, his sexuality, his this, his that, and it's like, this man doesn't, he's you know, they're not unhinged, but they're like, it frightens them. And very quickly, what I'll say is, we're in a time of like bullshitters and bluffers, right? Radical vulnerability cuts through all of that. What terrifies people like Trump and Bolsonaro is someone who's actually real. And I'm not saying that I personally do, but like that level of like being true to yourself at a local or national scale, I think it's the way forward. So yeah, long answer to a short question, but thank you.
That vulnerability, which I'm sure, we all felt it. I felt very uncomfortable. I felt quite seen in certain parts.
People attack you as well. I mean, reviewers will attack you.
Well, that's one of my questions, I guess, which we talked about this. We talked about your calm, and we talked about your writing post your trip home. And we're talking now in hindsight, very comfortable. You wrote on your, what would you do if you were more confident? That's you now.
Yeah.
Was there an element, was there some, oh shit, when you handed it over to the publisher, not knowing what the response was, going back to that point, just show me some realness. Tell me how
I was completely at peace, weirdly enough. I've never been so at peace with a piece of work. Like, I really believed in it. And it was so strange, because this book got rejected by everyone except Rough Trade. Rough Trade, they came in a year later with when they got the offer, they got the book, and they made an offer like that. They were like, we got it immediately. But so people, oh, is it fact? Is it fiction? Is it prose? Is it poetry? Like, is it too long? Is it too short? I'm like, is it a good book? They couldn't work out. They couldn't just put out a book that they thought was good. And some of those individuals, well, to their credit, one got in touch and was like, oh, like, we kind of got this wrong. Like, yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, you did. And I'm glad you didn't take it, because you would have been kind of ashamed of it. It'd been like having a kid where you're like not proud of the life choices they've made. And the kid is clear that you're ashamed of them, but they kind of have to hang out with you. And I was like, I'm glad I didn't get a half-hearted publisher who took the book. Like, Rough Trade, basically, they say you should not judge a book by its cover, but there's an exception to every rule, because, my God, these books are basically thirst traps. They're thirst traps. Like, I see this book, and I was like, I always wanted to design. Shout out to Craig Oldham, amazing designer, and Prince of Thieves, who did the printed covers, like the screen printed covers. I wanted a book that expressed the personality of the book, like through the design, and they have absolutely nailed that. Even with like having like the poems on like black pages, like stroke of genius, like that. It was like the book found the perfect home, if that makes sense. So yeah, sorry to embarrass you again, but so they take it. Oh, that title, I'm proud of that actually, because when we were going through it, I was like, it has to be that. Like, you see that on any bookshelf, on any people be like, oh, like, ooh, even down to the comma and the full stop. because it's definitive. It's like that thing has to be like if you saw that thing like imprinted on a wall, it's like, this is my statement. There's no comment section on this. It was all about love. Oh, no, maybe debate that. No, you're not debating it. It's all about love in the end. And there's something about, I don't know, like the more writing I was doing, the more I was like, we've got to go back to the old stuff like Aesop's fables, right? The basic storytelling, tortoise, hare, like that's the... So this book is kind of like an Aesop's fable, if that makes sense. That's the plan.
I think if you sold that cover with the title as merch, as a poster, people would have it on their walls.
I got asked for print. I got asked today, actually, Nina. They said, actually, Sophie, they said, like, can we buy this as a print? Can we buy this as a print for Christmas? I want as a Christmas thing.
Okay, let's sell out of those football shirts first.
I'm not asking. I'm just saying this is what the people are asking for. Yeah. Voice the people. Yeah.
Any more questions for Musa?
Somebody earlier asked about responses to your book, emotional responses, and I know recently you did Striking Out.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know how the kids have been finding you.
Oh my goodness, that has been. I love writing children's books. It's a different part of what I do, but I absolutely adore it. I got a really amazing response to this. One guy was like, my son read it and he's like, it's the best book he's read, he said. And then he was like, sorry, that sounds like but he said that. And then he went out and he scored a hat trick. And they sent me a picture and he was there going, and he was like, I got tagged on, so the best response has been like on Facebook, like she tagged me on Facebook and was like, yeah, like, please write a sequel to it. And the other response I got that really moved me was, I told my son to read 15 pages each evening, and he'd read 78. He'd read 78 pages. And that right there, he was like, and my son doesn't really like have time for this stuff. And that book actually, weird enough, Striking Out is the most woke book I think I've ever written. And I've got away with it. 2 pivotal characters are gay. There is a whole critique of structural interpersonal racism. They're like, the middle names of some of the players are like, names of African revolutionaries. There's a Marcus Garvey Easter egg in there. Like, it's the most woke book ever. And like, everyone's like, oh yeah, it's a children's book with Ian Wright. It's not. It's too late, it's out there. It's out there.
Trojan horse.
Listen.
Any other questions before I got one? Anyone else? Yes.
One more? Yeah, I don't want to keep people there too long.
So your writing's very sort of quite intimate and personal, but I think with the books there's a level of abstraction with like the words on the page. So the more recent years you've been doing a lot of the podcasting stuff, which is a very different medium, and a lot of the content of that is less personal, but I think because of the format, it's quite intimate. People are listening to you on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
And I guess they can feel quite sort of attached to you and feel like they know you a little bit, and I guess it's the same for you as well, Tayo. Like, how is the difference between sort of people's response to the writing versus sort of the podcasting? And
it's quite similar. It's actually quite similar, yeah.
And how do you deal with sort of the people feeling like they kind of know you from the podcasting when, they don't as a person?
Do you know what? It doesn't... that's a great question. Because you realise they've been listening to like all this stuff and reading all this stuff, and I think the one thing is the weirdest thing is that the most intimate space, like romantically, I think that you tend not to engage too close with people that think that if you're friends, it's kind of arm's length or whatever. But if someone wants to get to know you more intimately, it makes you more wary because people have almost projected something. So I've dated people before who. I think I almost disappointed them because they're like, oh, we expect to be this like tortured artist. And I'm like, well, not really. I write and it's 9 to 5. I go through tough stuff, but like, I've always been functional. I've always paid my tax bills, never missed a bill, never missed a rent payment. Like, I'm basically like, I always get my stuff done. And I think that this person, she thought I'd be like, more like magical and more like, oh my God, he's emotionally distant because he's working on his art. And I'm like, I get home and like turn off my phone and be like, okay, my time is yours now. Like, we're seeing each other. Oh, you're not talking about your writing. I said, well, no. She says, I've never seen you write. I'm like, well, it's a day job. I've never seen you at your job. And I think because she knew me before as a writer, I think I really disappointed her, actually. So that the one thing you did, I think I'm less magical than, oh, he's just this, he's that. I was like, no, I'm just like just a dude that writes, So I think, yeah, if there's anything, it's been the disappointment. So yeah, don't. If you want to maintain the aura, don't meet people, I think is the answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends on who you are on your podcast as well. The thing about people thinking that they know you, especially in the weird world of football, because you come up against just very, very random people who think it's okay to come up and ruffle your hair or to come up. Do you know, like, I don't know you. Like, my friends do it and my friends talk to me a certain way, but that's because they're my friends. And this is kind of out there, and when your stuff leaves you. But yeah, equally, the other side of it is when stuff leaves you, then you become, in a way, public property. And we were talking beforehand about the bits that you keep to yourself.
Yeah, keep some back. What I will say about it is quite nice that people feel they can reach out, because you do get on Stadio, like, people write to you, especially men, actually, and men that aren't that used to expressing their feelings, just the way we're socialised, right? It's not because of genetics, it's the way we're socialised or whatever, but men will feel comfortable enough to write to you about quite intimate things, and that's a real compliment, actually. They feel they can tell you that, like, and they're like, oh, we know you're just a football podcast, but we feel like you're kind of like a conversation that we could eavesdrop on and, like, join in and, like, not feel. And it's like a lot of the time we get emails from people, it's like they feel they're coming in from the cold, because we often ask on the podcast, like, how's everyone doing? Hope you're safe and well. And they're like, it sounds like you mean it. And we do mean it. And we're glad that people get in touch. I mean, just yesterday we got a beautiful email from someone whose grandfather had passed, which I've got to reply to. And we take time out of our week every so often to just reply to the messages. And we wouldn't get those if people didn't feel like they knew us. And to some extent, they kind of do, you know? They kind of do.
Last quote, which I've always really liked from the book, is, because I risked everything for a career that existed when I started, but it doesn't now.
Yeah.
It does, doesn't it? Because you're doing it. I see writers in here. It does exist now. Well, follow-up question to that is something else that you mentioned from the book. As it does exist, and are you enjoying it, are you savouring the view?
This is the happiest I've ever been. Personally, professionally, creatively. It's so weird, right? None of this stuff existed. The book deals didn't exist. When I finished writing And Then It's All About Love, the book was still a year from publication, a year and a half or a year, whatever. And now, like, these books all came out, the podcasts I'm working on, like, everything's changed personally, financially, professionally, creatively, like, well, not creatively, I'm still doing the same thing, but, and the really exciting thing, because it all kind of happened at once, my dream was never ever to be the best writer, whatever that means, or the best podcaster, whatever that means. My dream was always to be like a gold standard, to the point where if you walk into a room of 1,000 people in 4 different disciplines, like football commentary, political commentary, whatever, I could be in those rooms and be like, Musa, how's it going? Like, he belongs here. Like, he's writing stuff that's, like, of interest. And I always wanted to be someone that could be in all 4 rooms. And I feel like I'm there. Like, I feel like I'm not about being the best. I don't care. I just want to be someone that, like, that belongs, that is making work, like, not even the biggest profile, but just of renown and of respect. That's all it was ever about. And I've done that. And I don't, I know we talk about prizes and whatever, nominations, like, that's all nice because it helps visibility and it helps sales, but I never got into it for that. I just got in for my little corner of respect, and I've got that now, and I'm happy.
You have got that now. And thank you for sharing that with us today. Thank you again to Rough Trade and to Pages Hackney for the chance to do this today and to talk to one of the best writers around as far as I'm concerned at the moment. So thanks a lot, Musa.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.